All right, super.
Okay. So tonight we're going to be reading the poetry of Steven Robert Heine, who I don't think anybody in this room knows, probably. So I'm going to give you a short kind of like, this is his bio from one of his last books called Smiles from Oregon. Smiles from Oregon. More than 40 years ago, an unemployed cannery worker named Steven Robert Heine burst into the publishing scene in Oregon as one of 3 local cartoonists. Heine drew a character for community publications that was nearly as poor as he was. The cartoon reached more than 150,000 people a week and brought Heine's humor into households all over Salem, Kaiser, and a number of other communities. From 1978 to 1981, Heine became the first author to appear at the Oregon State Fair, selling his poetry books and meeting thousands of fairgoers. The effort paved the way for more authors to come to the fair, beginning in 1986. The effort earned Heine the title, the first author of the Oregon State Fair. He holds degrees in history and political science from Portland State University. Having been trained as a historian, he published the book, The Oregon State Fair, in 2007. Later, in 2010, Steven Robert Heine took the stage at the Oregon State Fair in a show he produced with another author, Joseph Brown. In time, the 2 authors produced more than 50 shows at the fair under the name Oregon Authors Live. The shows featured Oregon authors and short skits by Heine and Brown. So I met Steven Heine in 2000, well, I met him at the State Fair, as one might expect. Because I love going to the fair. I love going to the State Fair, and I grew up in rural California, so I would go to the only thing happening in the summertime in Waurika, California, is the Siskiyou County Fair, and I would go every day and figure out new ways to get in there for free every time, because I had no money. So from 1999 to 2015, I probably met Steve about a half a dozen times. I saw Oregon Poets Live, or Oregon Writers Live, or Oregon Authors Live. And in the early days of the Salem Poetry Project, I had a hard time finding featured readers, particularly local featured readers. And right now I'm running kind of a waiting list, but back then it was kind of like if you were breathing and you had 20 minutes of poems, we'd get you in there very quick. And in 2015, I was kind of already planning on starting this, and so one of the things I did was I always go to the poetry section of the State Fair and kind of like read who was sending them in or whatever, and I would note that a lot of people were local who were submitting their poems for the poetry contest. So in 2016, I was like, this was going, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go look at those poems and see what's going on. It was the Jack Longman building, and there was a giant sign that said, Poet Steven Robert Heine. And it had his bio and the books he had done, and then he was the judge for the Oregon State Fair Poetry Contest. And he was a local guy. And so I'm like, okay, this is great. And I met up with him at the Oregon Authors Table, which if you come to the State Fair, is a giant long table and all these authors sitting there. He was wearing a giant red and white top hat, like a cat in a hat hat, like this. So Steve helped me out quite a bit. He was a featured reader in 2017, and at the Barrel and Keg. He came off and on over a couple of years. He really enjoyed coming to these events. I don't think that before he had come to the Salem Poetry Project, he was ever involved with other poets in any kind of regular way. He set up the meetup page for us. That was his meetup page, and we administered it together for many years until just recently. I took it over completely. And so I really appreciate all the work that he did for us. He did a lot of kind of like background work for people. The Oregon Authors Table you see at the State Fair. And sometimes you see at the Marion County Fair and other events around town. That was kind of his idea. Because when he started in 1978, he got a full 10 by 10 commercial booth. When you're an author, it's kind of hard to make that pay. And so the idea is to like make a smaller space for these authors and then just have more of them in. And so that was one of the things that he did. And when I'm a featured reader, sometimes I bring poems by Steve or other people. And when I go to Portland, I say, you know, this is one of the best-selling poets in Oregon. And they're like, no, what are you talking about? I'm like, from 1978 until 2019 or 2018, 2019, he was at the State Fair, pretty much continually selling his poetry books. There's hundreds and hundreds of his books all over the state. So, and Steve and I are kind of like poetry pals. Yeah, poetry pals. We're kind of cut from the same cloth in that we kind of like, sometimes there's a lot of like throw stuff against the wall and see if it sticks kind of about us both. And we both have like a sense of humor that doesn't always necessarily hit. So anyway, I'm going to read some of his poems here. I have 3 or 4 poetry books by him. And this first one I'm going to read from is called Spring Rain. It was published in 1978. He's got this untitled first poem. It's not attributed to anybody else. It's not a typical poem from him, from Steve, but I think he wrote it. I am the relentless master. I am the unquestioning servant. I am a determined gladiator who has stepped into the arena against an army of giants, armed only with my heart and my pen and a quiet faith in the wisdom of the forces that brought me to battle this moment. This is kind of a more typical Steve Heine poem. It's called Old Prose Toes. There once was a time when I used to write prose while holding a pen between my toes. But was it sad or was it sweet? I never thought to ask my feet. This is called Charlie's Bar. Each weekend night, the lonely hearts come to Charlie's Bar. They come from town and all around, some from way out far. They drink their beer and sip their scotch and gaze with hopeful eyes. As hours go by, their loneliness gets harder to disguise. Old Charlie watches as he pours the brew to ease their gloom. Yet even he can feel their pain hang heavy in the room. A ready smile, a reservoir, a bourbon-flavored jokes. His is a missionary call to cheer these downcast folks. Here's another one. Okay, this is called Gone Again. And a lot of these poems are really short, only 1, 2 stanzas. Another night has slipped away, lost within a new essay. Letters I had planned to write must sleep within my brain tonight. Okay, so I'm going to read this poem called Strudel. In Steve's early books, he had several poems that were written in an accent. And I can't do accents very well, and it turns out neither can Steve. So this poem is, I think it's supposed to be a German accent, but it comes out like a Swedish accent, because he's got other poems written in a Swedish accent. All of his J's are all wrong, so to start off. But anyway, we're going to read Strudel. This is Strudel, or if we're using the German, Strudel. Even that was bad.
That was good.
My German is so old. Okay, Strudel. Ma Strudel was gut. We ate it with passion. She made it with apples in their old country fashion. Her sauerkraut, too, was a Heine's delight, piled high as the Alps, but we ate every bite. Ma ain't still around, but her memory lingers. Strange how their years, they just slip through your fingers. She went up to heaven to do cooking up there. And on Sundays, I still smell her strudel, I swear. Pretty rough. This is the title poem from Spring Rain. Now it's May 10th and it's raining, but it's really late Tuesday, and I ain't much for complaining. But I sure could use a news day. My diploma's bought no groceries ever since my graduation. Though just yesterday I filled out my 10,000th application. Little spiders in the ceiling still refuse to share the rent. And I get a funny feeling that my luck's all been spent. 4 long years of midnight oil just to have no oil at all. The sound of doom comes stirring round and beckons with its call. So, sure. I'll be reading some poems from his second book, which came out about 80, called The Carpenter. And Steve writes light verse. And so it's, and this is something I can't do, really. I've been, even though I've tried, which is, he's got a meter that he sticks to. There's rhyme, which is varied, and he's got, well, it's not belly laugh, but it's amusing, it's funny. Whenever I try to do this kind of stuff, it's all kinds of weird filler words and stuff, and he's got really weird words in here. So, anyway. But I really admire that because he makes this, as I'm reading it, he makes it effortless, really. A soggy native. I'm as used to Oregon as a duck can get, but I still wish the rain here wasn't quite so wet.
Oh my God. Deep.
Yeah. An encouraging word. You've come to the end of a lonely year, and you dread the thought of another. But if loneliness were pleasant, lovers wouldn't rejoice when they found each other. Thanks. Thanks for that pretty smile of yours. Thanks for being you. Thanks for the kind of understanding that till now I never knew. Thanks for the way you listen as I slowly ramble on. And thanks for your love as I draw you close when the rest of the world is gone. Yeah. This is called, another one, Be Tough. Life is like football. You get shoved and kicked and pushed in the dirt. But you'll never win too many games until you learn how to play hurt. Okay. This is the title of the title poem for The Carpenter. And it's full of like weird words, but they all work in the rhythm meter that he's got in here. So again, I'm just kind of like in awe of it. The Carpenter. As the sun melts slowly into the hills, the silence is broken by 2 whippoorwills. The carpenter smiles and turns from his work and hoists me upward with a muscular jerk. His old wooden pipe is still clenched in his jaw, and I teasingly steal it from my old grandpa. Then we walk a short distance and suddenly stop. The tackle is stored at the back of his shop. When we left Milwaukee and came out here, Steve, the fishing was better than you'd ever believe. In the big Lucky Mute, where the nettles were few, I could nab my whole limit in an hour or 2. Jasper passed away back in '43. We nailed some lunkers, that logger and me. Come the 1st of May every year, we'd take the highway south to Diamond Lake. I'd catch 30 or 40 every time we went. And got some banged up flatfish with a reel that was bent. As he painted his stories, his old eyes would glisten, and excitement would fill me as I'd eagerly listen. I could see his pole bend, I could hear his reel grind, and his trophies would flop in the back of my mind. Then he'd sent me down and flicked off the light to close up the shop for another night. He was born in Germany, in Oregon he died, but he taught me the meaning of a craftsman's pride. And on dark winter's days, I'd find myself wishing that the carpenter could tell me another story about fishing. So, yeah. Another book that I have of his is called Angel and Sometimes I Smile. And he had noted elsewhere in one of his bios that he would fall in love a lot, and then the relationship wouldn't work out. So half of his poems were about being in love, and half of them were about being lonely. And so this book is a little bit later, and this is one of his love poems, Angel. The most delicate flower I ever saw, the tenderest bird I ever heard, the sweetest song I ever knew was you. And this is on being human. There's no such thing as a tragic life. Every life is tragic. Yet each heart are wondrous powers of love and dreams and magic. Okay, the elegant guest. The room lies deep in disrepair. I drape Mom's coat across the chair. This place could use a woman's touch. I'd already surmised as much. Would you care, Mom, for a cup of tea? She throws an anguished glance at me. Just what I need to quench my thirst, but let me wash your cups out first. While she fights mildew, moss, and mold, I hide a sardine who's growing old. She opens the cupboard with a mother's dismay. What do you live on anyway? I just heat up a can and see what I get. It's called gastronomical Russian roulette. I laugh as I pull a fork from my chair, but Mom stirs her tea with a mother's despair. You could move home to a healthier life, at least until you found a wife. Now, Mom, you know that would be wrong. It's dusty here, but it's here I belong. She turns in shame to hide a tear, sees me smiling, standing near. A poet's life must seem very strange. And you, of course, are too stubborn to change. And then this one is Sometimes I Smile. Sometimes I smile as I dream in bed of roads behind and roads ahead. Smiles from Oregon is the most recent book that I have of Steve's. In late 2024, he was living on the coast and he took a fall. And he's not been able to live independently since. So, and so he's in a nursing home. But he does see these, or he is on Facebook and so forth, so hopefully he'll see this.
What nursing home? Here in Salem?
I think he's in Kaiser someplace, but he hasn't told me where. The poems in Smiles from Oregon, he all read at the, he read them at the Salem Poetry Project. So I think we're very nice to have that. So I'll read a couple of these. As I see it. I'm not the man that I used to be, but I never really was. I am what I am, whatever I am. I do what I do just because. Okay. So this is a poem that I read up in Portland if I'm reading Steve's work, because I just find it crazy. It's called Hard Times. And he's got this uncle with a weird, the first two lines, the resurgent ruin of my Uncle Nerp. I don't know what kind of a name NERP is, but whatever. Okay. The recession ruined my Uncle NERP. He walks with his back sadly bent. He invested $1 million in a cologne factory, and today he hasn't a cent. They're getting a little bit corny, aren't they? Okay. Very internal revenue. I swallowed a nickel the other day, and boy was I ever nervous. You could hear it coming. My life was saved only by a very quick call to the Internal Revenue Service. All right, so I'm going to finish up with this one. Actually, we're going to end kind of on a melancholy note. And if you're watching the CU, I'm going to cut out the last 5 words of this. Near the end of his book, Smiles from New York, he's got a chapter called Chapter 29, Prelude, Beginning of the End, Oregon State Fair, September 2017. And so this is how the book ends, almost. It is early evening, the last day of the Oregon State Fair 2017. Steven Robert Heine sits wearing a top hat, staring out at the fair from the table in the Oregon Authors area. In the midst of the noise and energy around him, his mind drifts back to another time. He had come to the fair 40 years ago when there were no authors at the fair. He had rented a commercial booth to sell his 3 tiny poetry books and see if an author at the Oregon State Fair could succeed. The experiment worked well enough that Heine rented 4 commercial spaces outside for the next 3 years to come. The irony was not lost on the old poet now that the commercial booth where he worked that first year was very near where he sits now. As Steven Robert Heine stares out the crowd and activity of Columbia Hall, he suddenly hears a familiar sound. It's the lonely sound of a distant train, a sound he knows well. Motioning to the author beside him, Heine begs the author to watch his book table for a while. Then, without word, he gets up and begins to walk out of the author's area. Nearby, Heine sees Joe Brown, again holding court with a group of people listening intently. The two exchange nods, and Steven Robert Heine continues to walk out of Columbia Hall and toward the main gate. On his way out, a fairgoer stops him and asks, "Are you Steven Robert Heine?" Heine pauses for a moment and smiles faintly. "No, but I used to be." As the train blows its whistle again, the sound is much louder now. Heine glances back at the Oregon State Fair briefly as he leaves the main gate. Cane in his left hand, he walks with an inspired pace. It is as if he is late for an urgent appointment. Steven Robert Heine walks past the Oregon State Fairgrounds and turns down a road that so many people leaving the fairgrounds have walked down before him. Heine shivers and smiles to himself as he sees the street sign. And with that, he hurries out of sight. Steven Robert Heine. So anyway, I miss Steven Robert Heine. I wish he could come out.
Well, why don't we go there? We can do a reading.
I don't know.
They do that all the time in music and all kinds of stuff in those places.
I'll ask him.
Okay.
So we got some snacks in the back. We got some Rice Krispie treats and some other stuff that people brought. There's some free books back there. And there's 2 lists, one's for the mailing list and one's for the open mic. So sign up for the open mic and we'll take a little break and then come back and do some more poems.